The next area I want to touch on is probably one of the most crucial. But some of you will have to weigh it for a while before you see how significant it is. Now God says, wait, not because I want to take the fun out of your life, but I want to protect you from suspicion and distrust. And I want to provide for you one of the most powerful factors in a fulfilled love, sex, and marriage relationship, and that is trust. Trust. Sex the way God intended it to be between a husband and wife calls for a 100% abandonment to your mate. And ladies and gentlemen, if there's any distrust in your future relationship, you can never have that 100% abandonment. Look at it this way. Every one of us here. I don't care how old you are, how young you are. You want intimacy. You want to be intimate with someone. Now the question is, how do you define intimacy? We use that term all the time. What does it mean, intimacy? A 16-year-old woman wrote me a letter that defined it better than I've ever seen. She said, Mr. McDowell, intimacy is the capacity to be real with another person. Ooh, I like that. Isn't that what you want, guys? Yeah. Isn't that what you want? To be real, right? With another person, especially in love and sex and marriage and family. No facade, no barrier, to be real. But think through this way. As much as we want that intimacy with someone else, if there's any distrust in the relationship and premarital sexual involvement, to various degrees adds distrust later in a marriage relationship. If she played around before, what confidence, what trust factor do you have that she won't play around afterwards? If he had sex a number of times before with other women, what trust factor do you have, what confidence do you have later that he won't play around with somebody else? You don't. And the distrust factor will come into your relationship. And if there's any distrust, you can't be vulnerable. And if you can't be vulnerable, you can't be transparent. And if you can't be transparent, you cannot be real. Now let's look at it in the positive. I've been married to the same woman for 18 years, to Dottie. Now I'm going to make a statement that'll be a little hard to swallow here, but I'll try to prove it to you. But I never dreamed, this is a statement, it'll be hard to swallow, I never dreamed that my date life, now think of this ladies, my date life, 20-some years ago, I never dreamed would affect my marriage this very moment. You say, come on. You trying to tell us the way you treated women on a date 20-some years ago is affecting your marriage right now? That's right. In one of the most positive areas of trust. You say, how does that? Well, I was dating a young lady by the name of Paula when I was in graduate school. We dated for 3.5 years. We almost got married. We really thought we were in love. And then we realized we weren't in love. We just liked each other. I mean, we had a hilarious good time together. But you don't get married on that. You can have a hilarious good time with a chimpanzee, but you don't marry one. And no, she wasn't a chimpanzee, don't get me wrong there. But we broke the relationship off. And it was one of the hardest things I ever did because, guys, I felt she was everything I ever desired in a woman. And when I walked away from that relationship, I mean, I felt sick to my stomach. But we had the faith that if God had us to be together, we couldn't stay apart. And as a result of that, we remained the closest of friends. And to this day, Paula is one of my dearest and most respected and closest friends. And because of that, several years later, when I met Dottie, and Dottie became my wife, Dottie met Paula. Now think of this, guys. Here's my wife meeting a woman that I had dated for 3.5 years. And they really hit it off together. Well, they had something in common. They really did. And so, guys, here was my wife spending a lot of time with a woman that I dated for 3.5 years. Now, guys, that could be dangerous. I came home from a high school university tour, got home about 9 o'clock one morning, and Dottie wasn't there. And about 11:30, she came in, and I said, "Where you been, honey?" She said, "I had breakfast with Paula, and we just spent the entire morning talking over a cup of coffee." I said, "Did you have a good time?" She said, "Did we have a good time?" I said, "What do you mean?" And my wife walked over to me. She put her arms around me, and I leaned up against the chopping block. She looked up at me. Now, guys, to understand this, you not only need to be married, you need an intimacy in your marriage, a vulnerability, a transparency. Because when you have that, guys, I'll guarantee you, All your wife will have to do is just look at you. Not say a word, just look at you, and you'll know something's coming. You know, my problem is I always don't know if it's good or bad. And my wife cuddled up next to me real close against that chopping block, and she looked up at me with that something coming look, and she said, honey, I'm so glad that you behaved yourself for 3.5 years. I said, why? She said, honey, Paula shared to me there were times that she was so in love with you, she would have done anything, and you never once took advantage of her. I kind of went, whew. But then I started to wonder, when were those times? How could I have missed them? Kathy, where are you? Right here. Kathy, put yourself in my wife's shoes. How do you think that made her feel?
Real good.
How?
Real good.
Tell it right in the mic.
Real good.
Real good. Yeah. Is that what you would like in your future marriage and relationship? Yeah. How about you? What's your first name? Rondi. Think of what that meant to my wife. I can trust my husband. And let me tell you, that's one of the most powerful factors for fidelity and faithfulness. My wife trusts me. And guys, it started when I was your age. It started in the way I treated women on a date, added one of the most powerful factors in my love, sex, and marriage relationship. And one thing that helped me in dating is I always wanted to treat a woman on a date, so I looked forward to the woman that I marry meeting the women who I dated. And boy, does that motivate you if that is your true conviction and desire. My wife trusts me. In Proverbs chapter 20, it says, many men boast of his loyalty, but who can find a man who is trustworthy? In Proverbs 31, the whole emphasis there is, blessed is a man who finds a woman who is trustworthy. Because when you do, you can have intimacy. Because you can be vulnerable, you can be transparent, and then you can be real. So God says, I want to protect that. I want to protect you from suspicion and distrust and provide for you that positive factor of trust. Then God says, don't commit sexual immorality. Not because I want to take the fun out of your life, but I want to protect you from the fear and the consequences of sexually transmitted diseases. Now the problem here, when I share this with you, most of you sit here and you think you're invulnerable. It'll never happen to me. Do you know, every person I've ever talked to that got a sexually transmitted disease said, I never thought it could happen to me. Almost every person straight across the line. As I said before, today, 55,000 Americans will come down with a sexually transmitted disease. 20 million this year. In 1980, it was only 4 million. In 8 years, 9 years, it's gone from 4 to 20 million with all the emphasis on safe sex. Not many years ago, there were only 5 or 6 sexually transmitted diseases. Now there are 38. The Minnesota Health Department says that 20 of them are not stopped by contraception. You don't hear that in your health class. You don't hear that from Dr. Ruth. If AIDS wasn't on the scene today, there'd be 5 things that would rob the headlines on magazines, newspapers, everything. But these 5 things, you won't hear much about them. Why? Because AIDS is 100% fatal. Even if you're a carrier now, 100% fatal. These other 5 aren't 100% fatal, even though some of them have no cure and never will be, probably. If AIDS wasn't on the scene, the first thing that'd be in the scene would be syphilis. It's becoming immune to many medicines now. Last week I was at the University of Michigan and they revealed a study that was just done, and in the last 9 months, syphilis had gone up 125%. Doctors can't understand why. Oh, the emphasis, safe sex and everything else, and these things are exploding. Second, gonorrhea. Third, herpes. Now there's no cure for herpes. Almost 26 million Americans have herpes right now, and there's no cure. 500,000 to 600,000. Of course, it won't happen to you because you're invulnerable. But 500,000 to 600,000 will get herpes this year with no cure. And this is a tragedy of herpes. A 19-year-old girl came to me. She said, Mr. McDowell, when I was 17, I had sex 1 time with 1 guy. She said, just 1 time. 8 weeks later, I found out he had given me herpes. She said, a year ago I got married. She turned around, pointed to her husband and said, and I gave my husband herpes. Then, girls, she was just bawling. She had a little baby buggy. She turned the baby buggy around. She reached down, picked up her baby and said, my little baby was just born with herpes. That little child, that little baby, the rest of her life are going to have the consequences of one time with one guy when I was 17. Some of them, it's 2-3 years later they wake up to it and found out they got herpes. Then the next thing to be on the scene would be, most of you never even heard of it, chlamydia trachomatis. Chlamydia trachomatis. Up until a few months ago, it was the #1 sexually transmitted disease. This year, about 3 million women will get it. In the university, out of sexually active women, which are about 50% of the women, 1 out of every 4 has it. 1 out of every 4 in the universities. And here's the tragedy. 25% of them will never be able to have babies. They'll become sterile. 33% of the babies that are born will be born with it. But here's the tragedy. 13 out of every 100 babies born to those women would be born with a major birth defect, mainly blindness. And I bet they haven't told you in the health classes that blindness is rampant in the third world, and the #1 cause of it is a sexually transmitted disease, chlamydia trachomatis. So you don't hear that. But then the fifth thing that would be on the scene, which has now become the #1 sexually transmitted disease, what's referred to as genital warts. Now, most of you guys have never heard of that, but a lot of you women have. Genital warts. Now, here's the irony. For years they have said to women, hey, don't worry about it, girls. It's only a nuisance, it's an irritation, there's no danger to your health, anything. You know, later on, if you have them removed, okay, but don't worry about them. There's no danger to you. Go for the gold. And everybody went for the gusto. Do you know what they've now found? It is the #1 cause of cervical cancer in young ladies. What for years they said, don't worry about it. There's no fear. But look at AIDS. I wish we didn't have to. Wouldn't it be nice to wake up and just be gone? You see, you don't hear a whole lot about it much anymore in the news. Why? People become numb to it. Somehow we think if we blank it out, it'll go away. But it's not going away. They just upped the predictions for 1991 in the United States. For years they said that 275,000 would die. Now they've upped it to 385,000. Look at AIDS. I was with Surgeon General Koop, the #1 health expert in our country. I said, Dr. Koop, I was in his office in D.C. I said, sir, if we don't come up with an immediate cure to AIDS, and he interrupted me and said, Mr. McDowell, we're not going to come up with an immediate cure. We are years away, so it could be way into the year 2000 or more. Later in the news conference, he said it well could be that we'll never find a cure. Well, I said, sir, if we don't, what is the most realistic, not pie in the sky, what is the most realistic, down-to-earth prediction for the world by the year 2000, 11 years from now? I thought the man was going to cry. That man really cares. He said, Josh, a minimum of 50 million will be dead. See, what they haven't pointed out is that AIDS is not only a retrovirus, it's a lentivirus. It's the first ever to cross over from animals to humans. It's been in horses for 80 years. The virus, similar virus, has been in sheep for 40 years and no cure. To this day, in the history of civilization, they have never found a cure for a lentivirus. Never. And some of the things they don't point out to you, they'll say, you're in a low-risk group, so go for the gold. The 3 highest groups, one of the 3 highest groups are 20 to 29-year-olds, and the one that's growing. So they said, don't worry about it as a teenager. But what they don't point out is this, that the average incubation period, that, in other words, AIDS lays dormant in the human body, you don't know you have it, but you can pass it on, is 8 years. Average. That's the average. They've now tested it up to 17 years it can lay dormant in the human body. But the average person is 8 years minimum. Now, one of the biggest age levels for AIDS is 2029. Now, this is what they don't tell you. Do you know when a 25-year-old got AIDS? When they were 17. you know when a 23-year-old got AIDS? When you were 15. You know when a 21-year-old got AIDS? When you were 14 or 13. You know when a 27-year-old got AIDS? When they were 19 or 20, on the average. See, you'll never, or probably never, see a large explosion among teenagers. Because by the time it's manifested, you've outgrown your teenage years. And this is also what they don't say. They'll say to you, safe sex. You've all heard it. You've heard it at school, in the classes. You've seen the commercials, the billboards, everything. Safe sex, use a condom. I think we got condomania going on. Pretty soon, everybody's going to have to live in condominiums. Then we'll have condemnation, the way it's going. Use a condom, use a condom, use a condom. You've heard it all. How many of you here that have heard all this information, use a condom, safe sex, kids, go for the golden? How many of you here know the statistical failure rate of using a condom to combat AIDS? No one. You've been brainwashed. I mean, why? If you've been given all the information about use a condom, then why haven't they told you the statistical failure rate of using a condom to combat AIDS? I was at the University of North Dakota, and almost every university has Safe Sex Week. They hand out safe sex packets with the condoms, the ointments, everything. They brought in all the specialists. They had the panels, the videos, the films, everything. I was the last speaker. They figured that was safe. I was the last speaker. And I'd gone through all the safe sex kits they'd handed out and read it all. And I asked the students there, and it was a huge auditorium jam full. I said, how many of you students this week or ever have been presented to you and all the information on safe sex, the statistical failure rate of using a condom to combat AIDS? Not one student. University! A whole week! And not one student knew. Do you know what it is? Do you know what the statistical failure rate is? Reported in the New England Journal of Medicine, American Medical Association Journal. In the first study, and also confirmed by research at the University of Miami Medical School. In the first study, heterosexual couples, not homosexual, heterosexual couples, using condoms 100% of the time, where one of the partners was a carrier. In 2 years, in just 24 months. Now realize, to get the final statistic, you'll need 10 years because it lays dormant in the human body. In the first 24 months, in the first test, they had a failure rate between 17 and 30%. In their second test, 3 out of every 10 of the partners, 30%, came down with AIDS in less than 2 years. That's safe sex. If I knew an airplane had a probability of crashing 30%, in 2 years, not only wouldn't I walk next to it, I wouldn't fly in it. It's an accident waiting to happen. You see, they don't tell you that. You've been lied to. And this is what I wish I never had to say. And you better plant this in your mind. This is the heritage that you have been left at your age. See, when I was your age, I didn't have this heritage in this sense. With these sexually transmitted diseases, many of them, like AIDS, lay dormant in the human body. In other words, it's in your body, but you don't know it. And it might be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years before it's manifested, but you can pass it on. And often those you pass it on to come down with it before you do. You will eventually come down with it, whatever it is. But a number of these sexually transmitted diseases lay quiet, sleeps in your body, and is passed down, but you don't know it. Do you know what that means? You kids right here, the rest of your life, this is what's left to you, the rest of your life. Whenever you have sex with anyone, young ladies, young men, you better have one thing going through your mind. You would be taking that person into your marriage bed, plus all their partners and all their partners for the last 10 years. That can be passed on, sexually transmitted diseases just like that, and then manifested in your marriage bed. Let me show you how this works out in reality. The number one thing I face now and have to counsel in traveling, and I was never prepared for this. 26-year-old woman came to me. She was crying. It was after a meeting similar to this. She said, Mr. McDowell, I've been married for 4 years. Last January 2nd, now a year ago this month, last January 2nd, they told my husband he had AIDS. Never been sick a day in his life. 12 days later, January 14th, he died. She said, Mr. McDowell, they traced it back to an affair that he had 6 years ago, 2 years before we got married. See, what that guy didn't realize is when he had sex with that girl, he was taking that girl right into his marriage bed. She said, Mr. McDowell, do you know what I have to do now? They have told me for the next several years, every 3 months I have to go into a sexually transmitted disease clinic to be tested for AIDS, to see if I'm going to live another 3 months. She said, do you know what it's like living that way? I can't sleep, I have nightmares, I don't want to go to work, I don't want to wake up in the morning. I walk out of that clinic and all I think, all that goes through my mind, all I dream about is 89 days I have to go back. 88, 87, 60, 50, 40, 30, 10, 2, 1, to see if I'm going to live another 3 months. She said, sir, do you know what it's like living that way? She said, if it weren't for my children, I'd kill myself. There's only thousands living that way now. Soon there'll be millions. God says, wait. Not because I want to take the fun out of your life, but I want to protect you from the fear and the consequences of sexually transmitted diseases. And young people, it's often the people at your age that pay the price later by the decisions that you make now. And the problem is, society is not helping you make the decisions. They're being pressured on you. You are called upon to make decisions that even most mature adults can't make. So trust your Heavenly Father. He cares. He can see beyond the emotion of that moment to your entire life. Trust Him. He cares. Then God says, wait, because I want to protect you from sustaining bad relationships. You see what happens is once you become sexually involved, there is a tremendous emotional bond. Now, it's hard enough to break up when you're not physically involved, when it's a bad relationship. But when you become physically involved, let me tell you, it gets tougher to make right decisions. And what happens is there's this emotional bond that takes place, and you become deceived. And you become deceived this way. Listen to me. One, because of the emotional bonding that takes place, you start to think that the relationship is deeper than it really is. And then you start to think you know that other person better than you really do. And that intensity of sex is mistaken for the intimacy of love. And you make a decision to get married, and by the time you say, I do, your marriage is finished. And we start to confuse sex and love. And God says, I want to protect you from sustaining bad relationships. Then He says, I want to protect you from sexual addiction. It's amazing what happens here. A couple start out really healthy. Now some of you can look back in a relationship maybe you're in right now, or maybe one you've been in, or in the future, mark my word. The moment you became physically involved, you started with heavy petting, touching of the breasts, the genitals, and then possibly into sexual intercourse. Almost straight across the board, the communication stops. And all of a sudden, the physical becomes the dominant part of your relationship. And you know what happens? That'll be mistaken for love. And all of a sudden, when you're together, all you think about is getting alone. Your hands in each other, being in bed. And all of a sudden, the whole communication process of really getting to know each other goes right out the window. God says, I want to protect you from that. Then He says, I want to protect the most beautiful gift that you have. I want to protect one of the most wonderful gifts I ever gave you, and that's virginity. That's virginity. Men, let me talk to you. I don't know why people talk to the women here. I want to talk to you men. Guys, on your wedding night, one of the most beautiful gifts you can give your mate is say, honey, to show you what my love for you means, to show you what sex and marriage and commitment means, I have waited, and I give you my virginity. Can you imagine that, ladies? Can you? Kathy, could you imagine that? Yeah, can you imagine it? Some of you ladies that start doing somersaults. Here the guy wants to have sex and you're doing somersaults. I don't think there's probably a woman in here that wouldn't dream and desire that on their wedding night. Isn't that right? Right. That's right. Wouldn't you desire that? Yeah. On a wedding night. Guys, it's one of the most precious gifts. Don't rob your future mate of it. You say, well, I need experience. No, you don't. Hey, look, guys, one thing you don't need practice at is sex. I'm serious. You want what God intended in love and sex and marriage and family? Then do this. Julius, do this. On your wedding night, Julius, be a professional in building relationships, in communicating, and be an amateur at sex. If there's anything that's fun to learn in marriage, it's sex. I put it this way, guys. Learn the tricks together. Any woman, I'm convinced, any woman and man who goes into the loving commitment of marriage, making the adjustments together, have an advantage in that relationship. You say, well, I want my first night to be so fulfilling. Why? You got your whole life ahead of you. Maybe the first night you don't even know what to do. I mean, maybe the first night you don't even have sex, you just sit there and you laugh. But I'll guarantee you, that laughter, that ignorance will bond you together. Well, I'm so glad my wife never robbed me of making the adjustments together. A 17-year-old girl wrote me a letter and she said, Mr. McDowell, I'm a 17-year-old high school senior and I'm a virgin. And my friends have been making jokes about it, pressuring me, little sly remarks. She said they hurt. She said the Why Wait campaign has given me a lot of confidence, so last Tuesday I had lunch with my 5 girlfriends. I wish I could have been there. She said we were sitting around there and I said to the 5 girlfriends, I said, look, I don't want any more jokes about my virginity. I don't want any more pressure for me to become sexually involved. Because you need to realize, each one of you need to realize, whenever I want to, any day that I want to, I can become like you. But you can never again become like me. Oh, that's true. I can become like you, but you can never again become like me. But thank God that virginity is not the final issue. The final issue is the grace of God. I don't care what you've done. I don't care if you've blown it sexually. I don't care what your background is. God's grace is greater than any event in your past, present, or future. And I think the ultimate thing is not being a physical virgin. It's being a spiritual virgin. Whether you've blown it physically or not, is experiencing God's forgiveness. Thanking Him that He loves you, that He died for you, and that you can become a spiritual virgin. That's the key. You are special, and you're worth waiting for. Thank you. God bless you.